All right, welcome. You are still watching Enter In, and I'm pretty much sure that you do remember the time we spoke about sexual purity, and a lot of people, did respond to it and said they would really want a part two, and that's what we're doing today. And we'll be talking to Pastor Panji Chipeta in a bit, and this time around we're looking at the sacredness of sex, and just looking at how a woman can be reflected as the tabernacle of the Old Testament. So joining me right now is Panji Chipeta. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. It's good to be back, and it's been quite a while, but it's good to be here again. Sure.
I remember a month ago we were talking about sexual purity, and there was a lot of response. I mean, and a lot of people were saying that these are topics that are not tackled in churches, and it's very important that we address it because it's affecting a lot of youths and people out there.
Well, Antonio, like you said, it's very true that young people are the most affected, so it seems. And yes, the response has been really overwhelming, and we thank everybody who participated and who responded, especially parents that I've been personally talking to. But I believe that this is a subject that cuts across the board. When we talk about issues of sexuality, everybody is involved in this subject. And that's why maybe sometimes we sort of kind of run away from it, because we're all involved. And, like you've rightly put it, the sacredness of it is what makes it sometimes even more difficult for us all to talk about it openly, when we should actually be freer and to talk about this as we should, in the sense that we know what sex is able to do, the consequences of it, especially when you do it outside marriage. We know in terms of the times that we're living in, there's now HIV and AIDS. We can't really cast a blind eye or bury our heads in the sand, as it were. Not only that, but we know also that the issues of sex today are so real because of the rampant pornography that is actually being sold on the market. Young people have got pornography on their phones, on their pads, like we are on their tabs, rather, on iPads and stuff like that. The parents seem, think I have my child in the bedroom, but they don't really seem to know what the child is up to. And sadly, this, like I said, cuts across the board. And elderly people as well do have struggles of their own as well in this regard as well. So we're grateful to everybody who responded. And here we are today again as we carry on.
Okay, very beautiful there. Now, looking at the subject that we're tackling today, how a woman can be reflected as, the tabernacle of the Old Testament. Maybe let's just dive into that as well.
Great. This is very serious and sensitive, and I pray that every woman listening in and watching this program really would take a leaf from it and begin to realize the value that you have as a woman. Every woman must know that you are priceless, so to say. Nothing can actually buy your virginity. Nothing can buy your being chaste in your life as a woman. And so the likeness of a woman to the Old Testament tabernacle is very critical. And so you realize that in the Old Testament we had the old tabernacle, which also had three parts to it. There was the outer courts, there was the inner court, and there was the Holy of Holies. Now, a woman is likened just to that. You discover that if you like, maybe saving a man too, because if a woman is likened to this, a man can be as well. But here it is now. We're talking about these three areas. The outer courts mainly stood for the flesh, which is the body. That is basically the outer courts, the flesh, the body. And you know that in the outer courts, in that sense, you have got natural sunlight, you've got, non-believers that hang around with you. That's all happening in the outer courts. And so women who are Christians, they can have guys that are dudes, they're handsome, they're good looking, they've got, pros, skill in whatever they do, and they can have the money and the comfort, and yet they're not believers. Those are people we find in the outer courts. And there are times sometimes when women get tempted to get involved with a guy from the outer courts, which becomes really critical as we go on here. So we see basically how that in the outer courts was an altar of sacrifice. In the outer court was an altar of sacrifice for the sin and the lava of a basin, or a basin, should I say, that also served more as a reflective glass. It serves more as a reflective glass, so that when you washed, you could actually see yourself in this basin, using this same water as a reflection for you. Now, before you can actually even approach the lava itself for washing, you must have actually placed your sacrifice at the altar. And we'll talk about these altars and what they stand for in a body of a human being very shortly here. In the same way, also, one of the things that touches a woman's heart is the ability to know and bring gifts and actually show to her the value that is on her. What do I mean by this? When we talk about bringing this altar where we take our sacrifice and take things, every man must learn to sacrifice for a woman. A man that is not able to sacrifice for a woman is not worth being with that woman. I think women should get this, very clearly and critically here. Any man that is not ready to sacrifice for you is not ready to be your man. Every true man will sacrifice for his woman. And that's why we see the altar of sacrifice in the outer court, because that's where we laid our sacrifice. In fact, if anything, I think we're looking forward to a time when men can take responsibility. Even when their women have made mistakes, a man must be able to own up for the mistake and say, you know what, I am the man, it's all right, I'm going to take responsibility. Where we need to correct certain things, we will, of course, tell women, okay, here's not right, and things like that. But mainly a man takes responsibility. That's why you see a scripture that says men ought to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for it. It's talking about the sacrifice that Christ did in terms of dying, especially now that we're in the season of Easter. Christ dying on the cross, he sacrificed for the woman or the wife, which is actually the bride, the church. And so every man must get to a level where he sacrifices. And that's actually one of the true marks for every woman to know a man loves me. If a man is able to sacrifice for you, that's part of the true love. If a man is not ready to sacrifice for you, forget that person. Okay, in the same way, also, one of the things that touches a woman's heart is the ability, like I was saying here, to bring her gifts. And every man must be able to realize that that's what we are called to do. In other words, it's not just gifts of any kinds. We're talking about being able to provide for this woman, being able to sustain this woman, being able to protect this woman, because true men at heart will protect the emotions, the feelings, and the well-being of a woman, including her intellect, by the way. That's why you support her when she's going for studies, further studies, and all. You'll be there for her. You're not intimidated as a man. You're not even threatened in any way or insecure. We've got some males, we'll talk about that as well, who are easily insecure with women like that, women who are go-getters. Okay, so we must be able to realize that. So the lover is supposed to be a place of washing. If a man is unclean in his heart, if he does not come to the lover, which is a place of cleaning in the Old Testament tabernacle, as we see it, you discover that it stops his fellowship with God. Now, when this stops the fellowship of a man with God, it tells you that he will have a problem also relating to the woman or to the women. These are men that in turn become, womanizers. These are men in turn that become players, if you like, and pimps that will only use women as prostitutes. That's why you can have people that own clubs. And in that club, they actually hire some ladies who pretend like they are, as we know it now, as models. They're not just models, for God's sake. Those women are being abused and used in some of those restaurants. They save when there are a certain type of people come into that restaurant. We are aware of the fact that they're just using those women. So those men who own such places will end up using women as pimps, as just mere prostitutes, and they're being paid in the back, in the back, and the young people sometimes don't know. Some of them know it, and that becomes really critical as well to understand that these are issues the Bible talks about when we are in the outer courts. So in the outer courts, everything is natural. That's why I found that in the outer courts, people want to have sex. In the outer courts, people are natural. The Bible says a natural man cannot understand spiritual things. That's why a natural mind cannot even understand why the Bible says, wait until you marry. Because I'm natural. Everything about me is natural. And so at this point, I don't respect the spiritual principles or the spiritual guidance that God has given me in his word. So I become disobedient. I become rebellious. That's why you see in the outer courts, it's easy for people to cohabit, to live together. It tells you that they're in the natural realm and they don't understand what the fact that sex actually is a spiritual thing. So in the outer courts, you're blinded, so to say. And there are so many women, unfortunately, that are blinded, that think they can use their body, they can use their beauty, and sometimes, unfortunately, they can also use their intelligence to get a man in bed with them, which is really wrong. And so we're simply saying here, there's need to move from the outer courts right into the inner courts. And I know that I'm not talking this mainly about worship. I'm just trying to use this from the context of sex that we're using here, but in terms of worship, it becomes deep and something else as well. So you cannot cohabit. In fact, it's so cheap for anybody to live with somebody before they marry. Very cheap. Why do I say so? Because once you do that, you're already betraying each other of your trust together. Every person that has had sex outside marriage, it's important to understand and realize also that you are actually dropping your chances of getting married early. What do I mean? We know that when it comes to land appreciates with whatever you put on it. Okay, plots today are expensive. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to this area of a human body or a woman's body, when a woman has sex outside marriage, it also, unfortunately, begins to depreciate them. They begin to depreciate. And that's why you find that chances of somebody who has had sex, outside marriage before get so slim when it comes to finding a right partner. Unless those who lie or who cheat their partners and say, I'm a virgin. Because maybe they were lied to, they were told there's a tertiary virginity, there's an issue of secondary virginity, primary virginity.
Maybe on that as well, Pastor. Is there such a thing as secondary virginity?
That's utter nonsense. That's utter nonsense. I think what people should be able to say here is that when you lose your virginity, you can still keep yourself and not go back there. There's this thing where people say you shrink back as a woman, and then, that's secondary virginity. Well, believe me, that's utter nonsense. When you lose your virginity, you've lost it, it's gone. That's why you see when we get into the Holy of Holies that hymen is actually broken. And for us as men, when that thing is cut, you find that there's even bleeding. That's why in the Old Testament you realize when they were actually trying to prove virginity from a couple to be, they would actually put a white sheet underneath. And if people bled, or if there was blood on that cloth, they would actually be able to tell these guys were truly virgin. But if there was no blood, they would know these guys played. So basically that's what it is. So nobody must lie to you. There's no such a thing as tertiary virginity, secondary virginity, primary virginity. Once you lose it, it's gone. And so, excuse me. And so basically what we're saying is that we must take responsibility of our own actions. So that's what begins to happen right in the outer courts. And so basically it's all natural. People mess up and fun. But again, we should not just blame the people in the outer courts. It's our responsibility as a church to begin to teach this stuff and make people realize, hey, this is a sacred thing that you're playing with right now. You don't have to play with it. Because as you'll see as we go on, sex has got such strong repercussions that can affect many generations to come after you're long gone. That's why you can't mess up now, because your children and your children's children's children can actually be messed up. I'll show you how sex is being used today to initiate people into Satanism. As we're talking right now, we've got men that wear rings that come from witch doctors. They put their, they wear rings on their penis, for instance, to from the witch doctor. They are able to sleep with more than 1,000 women, within a short period of time. Why? Because that's how serious these things can get. You have got people today that can actually steal a man's semen after sleeping with a guy. They put, they get the condom, behaving like they're going to throw it for you, and then yet that condom is going to the underworld. And once your semen is put on those altars in the natural, like we're saying, in the outer courts, it means your life is going to be in trouble. And that's why many people do not understand why they go through what they go through, because they've never really understood that sex can have such adverse repercussions on their own lives. And that's why it's critical for us to stay away clearly and know that when God says no sex before marriage, it's not to punish us. It's not to really get you to a place where you begin to fight with these sexual feelings. Don't forget that God himself has given us what is known as self-control. We can control and handle these sexual feelings that we have. It's normal to have sexual feelings. It's normal to feel sexy. But it's what you do with the sexual feelings that becomes really an issue afterwards. I know we all feel hungry. Do I just walk into Hungry Lion or any other shop, get their chips and chicken, eat and walk away without paying? Do you think they'll leave me? No, they won't. I'm hungry quite okay. It's good and the feeling is awesome of eating chips and chicken, but I've got to pay for them. What makes us think that when you have sex with somebody because you felt sexy outside marriage, you'll get away with it and run scot-free? There are consequences that will follow you. Apart from just what we're seeing today, people being infected, and some of the people, if you ask them who were infected, especially with the deadly disease HIV/AIDS, you'll discover that some of them acted just on impulse, and they found themselves sick today. And some of them, unfortunately, we have buried. Those are just some of the consequences. Others, they found themselves pregnant the first time they wanted to do it. And today we're talking about issues of abortions, babies being dumped. The other day, me and Steve called you, I think it was the day before yesterday, me and Steve called your station here and said to someone in TV2, we found some people, watching a baby was dumped in just a, what do you call it now? A drainage, yes. They threw the child there. So all those are consequences. And somebody enjoys the sex, but is not ready to be responsible. I think when you're about to have sex, think about these things. Are you responsible enough? And of course, the responsibility I'm talking about here is not just mere having sex, but where you are ready to go in a home, you get married, you have a man of your own or a woman of your own, and begin to be responsible of each other. That's what I'm talking about. Sex is a responsibility. You can't just have sex for free and run away. No. You are irresponsible when you do that. And we tell people the same way you actually lie down to make babies, you must stand up for those babies and defend them as well. So basically that's what we're saying here. The tabernacle aspect is very critical. So very quickly we move to the inner courts. In the inner courts, you'll discover it's now not anymore natural light from the sun. We have got light from the candles, the candlesticks, okay? You realize that basically this is something now that brings us to revelation, because when there's light, quite okay, you can move anyhow, you can do things anyhow. But when the dimness comes from the candles, it is just telling you to begin to walk now carefully, lest to bump into things and all. It's the same thing. In the outer courts, well, there's not much ministry being done there. But in the inner courts, you discover that now we find a priest who does ministry in the inner courts. And I want to say to the women here, I know people are saying there are very few women. I mean, there are very few men for women today. And so women are on the rampage, to getting men, that to an extent they even go for married men. I mean, that's shallow for any woman to do. That's actually cheap for any woman to do. And I believe as you're watching this program, you are not that cheap woman. Today I want you to realize your value and to realize the price God has put upon your life, the worthiness, that you don't deserve to be someone else's second best. You deserve to be the best for somebody. You don't deserve just another man, women. You deserve your man, a man that can be called your man, who will love you for who you are and respect you for who you are in that sense. So in the inner court, you find priests. A priest is who? A priest is somebody who stands also in the gap on behalf of man and God. They would actually intercede for man. Every woman today who wants a serious marriage, you must desire a man who fears God first of all. Because a man who fears God, in terms of a priest that is, will be able to treat you right. Now I know some people will already say to me, well, but there are some Christians who have done stupid things, for instance, silly things to women. What do you make of that? Well, we are at different levels of our Christian maturity, and you discover that some people can even pretend, even amongst us as pastors. Some pastors who have done things that are despicable. And sometimes if you go to some of them, not all of them again, some of them is truly falling because the devil tempted them and he hit them. But there are some.
And also maybe just on that, Pastor, on our fan page on Enter In on Facebook, people do come out with such points, to say that I've made it a point never to date a Christian because they're just playing with my heart. It's better I date somebody that I know does these things so that I will not be, very disappointed. So I think it's very important that you've brought out that point as well.
Exactly, because you see, we're supposed to be examples. And that's why it's critical. When you call yourself these titles we call ourselves, pastor, bishop, this and that and all, that is not just a title. It's responsibility, accountability, and it demands high levels of integrity. That's why you discover in the Old Testament, they will not just give these titles to anybody anyhow. But today what do we see? We see fellow young people appointing each other as pastors or anointing each other with, as pastors with cooking oil that remained from your cooking, and not this oil that God himself would actually give instructions to in the Old Testament, and they put herbs to it and so on. But today we're doing all kinds of things. And this is what is landing us in trouble and making people even not have trust and confidence in the church. And they say, if you can see pastors who are impregnating young ladies and doing all this, and that borders on sex, of course, as we're saying. I mean, what's the point of going to church? But I thank God that in this generation, in this time and age, God still has his remnant. And I believe that those of us that are speaking and having opportunities like I'm having right now can really live lives of examples and be able to tell people that, you know what, there are some people in this world who can still stand up in the midst of evil, who can stand up what is right in the midst of all kinds of sins happening. And I believe we are in that time right now. So basically, we're simply saying that we must lead by example. In the inner courts, we have a person now who is a priest. And so women, I want to say to you again, we have got so many men that fear God. Some of them may not look like what you want them to be. They may not have the cars that you're dreaming of. They may not even have the kinds of suits and clothes that you're dreaming of. But give them time, believe me, because everything takes a process. I never looked the way I'm looking right now a few years ago, believe me. But you see, there were some even women that looked down on me. And, just thought, oh, well, where is it going? Where is it going to take me? But at least I had a vision. And that's key. And I believe that every true woman is not just looking for a man who is good in bed. He's not just looking for a woman with skill in bed. But they're looking for men with a vision. Where are you taking me? Where are we going to be 5 years, 10 years down the road? I think those are the things that we begin to look into. So vision becomes critical at this level when we talk about the inner courts. So women, there are men out there not only with just a vision, but they fear God and they love God. Sometimes people love God and fear God may look like, they are just not the best men. They may look boring, for a start. But of course, you discover that what you think is being boring is what is going to keep that marriage and relationship in the process or in the long run. So when you get to these things that are, quick things, you got a man from another woman's man. Honestly, if you get a man from another woman, for instance, what makes you think he'll never leave you when he meets a better woman than you? It means this guy will leave you as well at one point. What makes you as a man also think a woman will never leave you for somebody better when she runs away from her husband to you? It tells you when she gets to that level, she will leave you for somebody else. Now we're winding up here. We haven't even touched the Holy of Holies. But like we said in the Holy of Holies, that's where now we have a curtain that divides the inner courts from the Holy of Holies. In the Holy of Holies, you have only a high priest that goes in there. It's not just a mere priest, but a high priest. So if you're a woman that is really looking forward to getting this man that is going to really treat you good, you must wait until God brings you somebody from the Holy of Holies. What do I mean? I'm talking about a man that really fears God. That's why there's a time of courtship. You can actually tell and learn from each other who is this person. Because I know people can pretend sometimes, and especially us as men, we can pretend for years as long as we know what we want to get, especially sex at the end of the day. I can even buy a car can buy a woman a car. I can buy a house, and at the end of the day, begin to demand for sex in the same house I've bought her. Do you think she's going to refuse? That's why we tell women, before you get some of these gifts, it doesn't matter how expensive they are. Ask this guy, where are you taking me? Are you sure you're single? Nowadays, we know a lot of stories where a woman is being cheated by this man saying he's single, and yet this man has been married, he's got kids, and sometimes even grandchildren. And the woman discovers in dismay, and they're broken and they're crying. When time of courtship is a time for you to learn more about each other than to begin to play with each other's feelings, emotions, and your bodies. It's time to know who this person really is. Where do you come from? Visit their family. The family sometimes will tell you, no, this brother of ours has got a wife, he's got children. But when you just meet on the streets and it ends on the streets, that's how you end up getting duped, if you like. And bakugongani, as we like saying. So basically this is critical. So the veil now divides. The veil, like I said, is almost like a hayman in a woman. That is the part of a woman that a man will have to actually, would like to get cut when a man actually penetrates. And so basically we're simply saying that no person, please, not every Jim and Jack should be allowed to enter you as a woman into the Holy of Holies of your life. It must be a man called your husband. Do you see why it's painful when a man dumps you after sleeping with you, after seeing your nakedness? When people come to us for counseling and they're crying because someone has dumped them, you discover actually that it was because someone touched things they should not have touched. Someone saw things they should not have seen. Can you imagine if you waited and this guy leaves you? I'm sure the pain would be there, but not be as much as when they see your nakedness and they touch things and do things to you that they shouldn't have done. So we're simply saying to you, keep yourself from heartaches unnecessarily or brokenness by being able to make right choices and wise choices for yourselves.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, and wishing everybody listening in and watching this program all the very best. You can do it, and God's help is there for each one of us. I know sometimes say, how can I do that? Is it possible? If others have done it, you can do it.
Okay. Beautiful stuff. There you had it. We're looking at the sacredness of sex, and also just looking at how it's important for you to remain pure as a young person, even as an older person, and making sure that you offer your bodies as a living sacrifices unto the Lord. Well, from me, it's back to the studio.